Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. The government has launched the new education blueprint for 2026 to 2035, setting out Malaysia's plans to reshape education for the next decade. So does it represent a shift in the vision for education and the school system in Malaysia? Well, joining me on the show to explore that further is Chan Soon Seng, who is the CEO of Teach for Malaysia. Soon Seng, great to have you back on the show with us today. So talk to me. Do you see a clear shift in the vision for education within this blueprint if you were to compare it to the previous one?
Yeah, thanks, Melissa, and thanks for having me on the show. I think that the previous education blueprint actually laid out a very, very comprehensive plan for changes across our education system, and I think that there's actually a lot of unfinished business from that plan, and there are some things that are worth not everything wholesale, right? But there are some things that I think that are worth considering and thinking about how we continue what was started in the previous education blueprint. So I think that when we look at this blueprint, we don't necessarily we shouldn't necessarily be thinking just on the sense of what's completely new and what's completely different, but is it also building on the strengths of the previous blueprint and seeing through initiatives that were started or didn't completely come to fruition. With regards to a shift in that we see in the blueprint, I think we also still have to wait for the full document to come out. And so what was released yesterday was the executive summary of the document, which kind of gives you a high level of the outcomes that we're looking towards. I think that overall, you do see sort of a similarity around some of the outcomes that were focused on the previous blueprint, and some of that I think are good things. I think the top one is quality, which is called out in the blueprint, and I think that that's where we really, really need to be making the biggest changes.
Okay, a couple of follow-up questions from that. What did you mean? What were you referring to in terms of unfinished business from the previous blueprint?
Yeah, I think that what's important is to really stock take and think about where we're at moving forward, right? And so making sure that process is being done, which I think the executive summary shows that there has been some stock take from that, and then we see that there are areas which we haven't realized the aspirations yet in the blueprint, right? So, for example, areas around quality, so strengthening student outcomes, and so the previous blueprint had this aspiration to be in the top third of countries that on the PISA rankings, for example. And in the first 10 years of the previous blueprint, we actually did see progress, and we made it from the bottom third into the middle third. But because of COVID and numerous other factors, we're actually back into the bottom third. And so I think that that's a key quality aspiration that we need to continue to pursue. One of the things that we see currently in the current executive summary of the blueprint is that when it lays out the quality aspirations, there aren't any international benchmarks at this point in time. And maybe that will be in the more detailed blueprint, but that isn't in the executive summary at this point in time. And I think that's an example of something where we'd want to see continuity.
Okay, so definitely we'll have to wait for the details to be announced. And one of the things we should be watching out for is whether there are how to assess quality and whether there are international benchmarks. I'll keep an eye for that as well. But let's come to what was announced, Soon Seng, in the executive summary. So I think there's a lot of focus on parents being now allowed to enroll their 6-year-olds into year one if they think their children are ready. Talk to me a little bit about where you see the potential upside to this, having this differentiated learning pathways, because I'm thinking the earlier children enter the schooling system, the earlier they will also exit the schooling system. So how do we make sense of different age groups within one cohort?
Yeah. So I think that the initial plan is to make it voluntary as of next year for 6-year-olds to start, right? But from what I understand, that will then be the new starting point eventually over time. And so the idea is to let them opt in first, but then eventually the mandatory starting age will become 6 years old. And I think that this is in response to, I think it's also laid out in RMK 13, if I'm not wrong, but I think this is in response to the fact that in 2040, something 2041, I believe, Malaysia will shift to becoming an aging society, and so the whole idea is that we want to be able to allow kids to start school earlier so that they finish earlier and are able to enter into the workforce earlier. I think this is also in line with a lot of international systems where kids typically do start earlier.
Okay, is that a smart choice though? I'm just wondering where having this kind of phased approach, the voluntary approach, do you see risks in this adjustment period before we get to the mandatory 6-year-old starting point?
Yeah. So I mean, I think that there are many factors that we don't have the details yet around how they're going to be managed, right? And I think some of the things that we have to think about is, number one, are there limits to the number of students that can opt into this? And so, for example, if 50% of 6-year-olds are enrolled into Standard One next year, what are the implications on physical class sizes, right? Especially when you think about urban overpopulated schools, will they have enough space to even contain or to host these students? Then the second thing is thinking about how does teachers' time get allocated to support these kids, right? And will you have like significantly large class sizes? Will you have enough teachers? Will there be additional classes that you may then need more teachers to support? And so I think that those are all some of the considerations that need to
Right.
be fleshed out, and also thinking about, are these kids going to sit together with the 7-year-old kids as well, and then, or are they separate classes, and then how do you manage all of
Right.
those dynamics?
So based on what you know, can we think through what we know from the executive summary? Can we think through what this blueprint requires from teachers? I'm just wondering, based on your network within the education educators, what are some of the first questions that teachers on the ground actually ask when a new blueprint like this is announced?
Yeah. So I mean, I think one of the things that was mentioned at the launch, which hopefully is a good thing for teachers, is the reduction in the administrative burden for teachers. I think that has been a priority actually for this current government that's in place, and it was also a priority in the last blueprint as well. But then seeing what that means in terms of the actual what's actually going to be taken off a teacher's plate, right? And how is potentially, for example, technology going to be used to streamline, let's say, administrative work, data entry, and all of those things. So I think that hopefully there's going to be some good things for teachers as a result in that reduction of administrative workload. I think then the thing that teachers would be asking is, what does this look like in terms of change of expectations for their day-to-day jobs, right? And what does this also look like in line with the upcoming 2027 curriculum that is being rolled out as well? And so, do teachers have access to the training and support that they need in order to deliver the blueprint effectively? And I think that that's the biggest challenge that we will need to really monitor and support, right? Like, what will the implementation of this blueprint look like, and how will there be, transparency and accountability towards its implementation?
Right. Are you curious about the learning matrix that was announced? This new year for year three, Form 3, new learning measurements. What do you understand about it? About the benefits of having it, the rationale of introducing it?
Yeah, I think that this is probably one of the big hot topics coming out of this announcement, right? I think that there one of the challenges of our education system is that we have been a very, very highly exam-oriented system, and as a result of that, most of the pedagogy or the teaching approach has been rote learning, and how do we get kids to memorize answers that they then regurgitate on an examination in order to get a certain score, right? And I think that in many ways that kind of learning is completely out of date, right? Kids do not need to be memorizing information because they have all of that information. Even more, we used to say that all of the information was available on the internet, but with AI, that becomes even more at everybody's fingertips, right? And so the way that our learning needs to happen for kids really, really needs to shift away from rote memorization, right? And so there is a huge concern of going back to high stakes standardized testing and what effects that will then take on the classroom learning experience, because it is very, very easy for a teacher who has spent 20 years of their life teaching in a rote exam oriented way, and then they had these couple of years where the high stakes exams were gone, but exams still existed. They're still the end of year school exams, but the high stakes exams are gone, and then they're supposed to teach in a more student centered collaborative take a more collaborative learning approach. But then it will be very, very easy for these teachers who haven't received the training and support to default back to an exam-oriented rote learning methodology. So that, I think, is the concern, right? But let's say if done well, and I think that a good indicator is that the primary school exam was announced to be a year 4 exam and not a year 6 exam. And so there's potential hope in that, in the sense that, being a year 6 terminal end of primary school exam is very, very high stakes, because basically you're only using that data to determine students' next steps, right? And the rationale behind a primary 4 exam is that actually, if you use it now as a checkpoint at primary school, you can use the data from that exam to make sure that kids who are falling behind have all of the foundational, or you're able to address and intervene and make sure that these kids are, you spend the next 2 years closing the gaps and making sure that they leave primary school with the knowledge and skills that they need.
Right. So not quite the, as you said, high stakes kind of exit exam, but enough time for intervention should it be needed. Okay, in the time that we have left, can I just ask you, from the executive summary, is there anything else in this blueprint that has caught your attention that you think really should be highlighted but has gotten lost in all the headlines of everything else?
Well, I think one thing that is highlighted, I think, in the Teras Lima is about the partnerships, right? So how does the ministry work closely alongside private sector, the civil society, NGOs, but also relevant stakeholders, for example, parents, right? And I think that that's going to be even more key as we move forward, right? Because I think collaboration is the only way forward to make sure that all of us are moving together, aligned towards a shared vision for what we want to be true for our kids.
Yes, definitely. I bring the parents in and collaborate for the kids. Thank you so much, Soon Seng, for your time. Chan Soon Seng there from Teach for Malaysia. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. Let's continue our discussion about the newly launched National Education Blueprint for 2026 to 2035. Joining me on the show now is David Chak, who is co-founder and director of curriculum at the education social enterprise Arus Academy. David, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Let's start with your observations about what's been revealed in the executive summary of the blueprint. I understand it's not the full details yet, but based on what we know so far, what has it revealed to you about how Malaysia is thinking about education for the next decade?
I think there are three things that it's worth mentioning. I think the first one is definitely that the government is serious about future-proofing our students. So we see the word mentioned a lot in the blueprint executive summary on like TVET, on like AI, on like digital learning. I think those are key concepts that we've been doing all this while, but having it more explicitly written in that way just shows how serious we are in making sure that the country's economy transition to one that's more digitally based. I think the second one that most people might have missed it is the decentralization aspect of it. So there's a lot of mentioning about Kaluesan, giving flexibility and also providing the school, institution, teachers, and students the autonomy, the freedom to do certain things within their power. I think that's very, very important because I think all this while, education in Malaysia has always worked on a more or less like a one size fit all, right? Because our country is so big. It's very hard for you to have one solution that's meant for everyone. So I think the new blueprint or Rancangan Pendidikan Negara have it explicitly stated that we want to give autonomy to school. We want to give autonomy to teachers, to students. I think that's a very, very good step forward because I think, again, right, you have a country that's so diverse. A school in Perlis will look very different than a school in Sabah, in KL. So I think having the autonomy allow the school, allow the teacher to customize the learning experiences for the students, for the teachers, so that they can create a truly individualized and personalized learning environment for the school and the students. So I think these are the 2 points that was highlighted. And the other, obviously, the one that everyone is talking about is, having 6 years old entering school and also the examination. I think these two, it's also showing two things. Number one is that this global benchmarking. 6 years old entering school year is not something new. It's not something groundbreaking. International school have been doing it for years. I think in America, in the UK, students start going to school as early as 6 years old. Now we're just catching up to that. And having the examination, well, they don't call it examination per se, they call it metrics, which has its own pros and cons as well. But that shows that the government is serious in thinking and listening to the people's voices and to create policy changes that does not compromise on the voices of the people to give them what to do.
Right, you're right that a lot of the attention has been on the 6-year-old entry and the learning matrix. But you said, you're so interesting, you said that not a lot of focus has been given to the fact that it mentions decentralization. Can we just very quickly explore more on that? Why is it so important that autonomy is given to schools and teachers? Just briefly based on your experience, David.
So I'll give my personal experience. I used to be a school teacher for about 7 years. And back then, so every school teacher, every government school teacher, you have to go through certain hours of training per year, right? Those are required. They call it the CPD hours, the continuous professional development hours. So back then, the CPD hours are fixed. There is this number of training. The school will do it for school-wide. Everyone do the same training, which is good in a way, but it also doesn't fulfill my needs, right? What if I want to learn, topic A, B, C, which no one else in my school needs it? So I think in a new curriculum, in a new blueprint, they allow the teacher the freedom to choose their own CPD path. That's one thing. And the second thing is also on the teacher placement. I think there's also a lot of mentioning in the blueprint talking about the loosening up of the regulation or the restrictions around teacher movement. I think teachers requesting transfer has always been bread and butter of the system, but it's also has always been a pain point, right? We have a lot of stories of teachers. They got married, but they have to separate, one in Kedah, one in KL. So the kind of situation we have heard too much of it. I think giving the loosening up the way the teacher can be transferred, I think that's going to solve that particular problem.
Okay, all right. And coming back to the, you said the learning matrix and the pros and cons of that. Let's have a look. Let's take a closer look at that. How do you view the Year 4 learning matrix and the Form 3 learning measurements? Talk to me about the potential benefits and maybe also the potential pitfalls.
I think we have to think about what is the purpose of the examination, right? I mean, let's just call it examination just for the sake of easier mentioning.
Let's call a spade a spade.
Right. So I think what is the true purpose of it? Because the blueprint did also mention that they don't want students to be defined by examination grades. On the other hand, they also introduce a centralized assessment. So then we have to really look into what is the purpose of it. I think it's interesting that they introduced the examination at grade 4, standard 4, because then it seems that it's more of a course correction. Because I think pretty much a lot of parents, a lot of school, they will want to know where their kids are, where the students are before they move on to the next phase, right? I mean, in primary school, we usually call it like P1 and P2, right? Primary 1, which is standard 1, 2, 3, and P2, which is standard 4, 5, 6. I think having the assessment in year 4 allows us to see whether is there anything that we need to fix? Is there anything that we could fix before they move on to standard 5, standard 6, and subsequently in secondary school? So I think having in year 4 sends out a signal that this is not meant to be, a high-stake exam that, you fail, you are going to fail for life, that kind of thing. But it's meant to be, okay, let's take a pit stop, let's see where you are and see whether do you need further support. I think if the government maintain with that intention, I think this is actually not a bad thing. Same goes with Form 3 as well, because Form 3 is also at a juncture where they need to decide where they want to go after Form 3, whether they want to continue on in the mainstream education or they want to go into TVET and all that. So I think having that assessment also allows us to, I wouldn't say at that point it's more of course correction, it's more of like setting course for the next phase. Because when you go into Form 4, Form 5, that's when you're preparing yourself for entering the society to work, right? Whether it's straight out of Form 5 or you continue on post-secondary and all that. So I think having that on Form 3 just gives a very clear picture, where do you go next? So just recap, having it at year 4 sets a course of, are you on the right track? Setting at Form 3 sets the question of where do you want to go next? I think as long as we keep to these 2 core questions, instead of how well I do, how bad I do, instead of fixating on the grades and the scores that students are getting, I think they may not necessarily be a bad thing. Okay. Now, however, it also relies on the perception of the parents, right? And the teachers as well. Are we treating it as a high-stake exam? I think that is the perception that we need to fix. That's a perception that we need to help parents to realize, to not fixate so much on the grades and the score, and more on like how do we assess learning and whether there's a need to course correct or there's a need to set a different course. I think that's the key question.
And it's a great question for us to also explore tonight. I'm just wondering what you think is required from teachers, from parents, now that we have this blueprint. I mean, it's great on paper, but in the implementation, it requires everyone beyond just the students, right? It takes all stakeholders. And I'm wondering, from the perspective of looking at specifically the parents, what would you like parents to consider as they digest this new blueprint?
I think there's a few things that the parents or society have to realize, right? But just to preface all this thing, Malaysians are very skeptical. I know, let's just call it that way, right? Whatever new policy, I don't know why they want to change it. It's been working on so well. But that's the whole point, right? Because education is something that's keep on changing. So I think parents should have a little bit more faith. I'm not saying they should have blind faith, but I think they should have a bit more faith in how things can be executed. I think in the blueprint, they also stated how they are aspiring for a whole of society approach. So it's not the teacher's job only to educate the child. I think parents also must realize that the responsibility to educate the child fall equally onto them, as well as the school as well. And that's a realization that parents must have. And like I said, just have a bit more faith. Imagine if we were to talk about a vaccination plan. Surely none of us will be making a lot of noises on this, right? We don't criticize or we don't question how a road is built or how a doctor treats his patient. So then why does education get a special treatment, right? I think the blueprint, having been involved in the blueprint in its early stage by giving input, I think the blueprint has tried really their best to get as much voice as possible, to understand what is the society's need. So I think the next step is just to have faith, but also keep vigilant in making sure that things are implemented according to the plan. I think in the blueprint, there's also a whole section talking about how they want to have this penjaminan quality and also have this like very strict monitoring mechanism built into it. So I think that is what we should keep them accountable for. And of course, a blueprint is set for 10 years. It doesn't mean that it's going to be fixed for the entire 10 years. I am very sure that, government would change or alter in the midpoint or in the quarter point just to make sure that it stays relevant. And because we did that for the last blueprint. So I wouldn't expect less of them for this time around.
Okay. And is there anything else you think that you have that comes to mind as you were going through this blueprint? When we talked about the exam, the learning metrics, anything else that you think really should be highlighted or any opinions you want to share?
I think there is a section, if you look at the blueprint, there is a section talking about what they want the students' learning experience to be. One word that caught my attention a lot is pembelajaran. Let me just look at it. Pengalaman pembelajaran bermakna. They want the students to learn in a very meaningful way. No longer is the time that we learn for the sake of memorizing, right? I think that's also the shift that we are moving towards. How do we make sure students can internalize the learning? The only way we can do that is that they see it relevant in their daily life. They see it in a meaningful way. I think that's one aspect that's put in the blueprint that's explicitly stated out, that is going to be the defining learning experience for the students in the next 10 years. The second point I want to also point out that there is a whole section talking about collaboration with external party. They want to create a mechanism. They want to create more opportunities for this collaboration. That is also something that we definitely want to keep an eye out for it, because from Arus' point of view, we work very closely between the private funders, private organization, as well as the Ministry of Education. I think having that set in the blueprint allows for more opportunity to collaborate. And it's not just Arus, again, like I say, right, they want to go with a whole of society approach. Now, how do we create that platform, that mechanisms, the whole of society can be a part of it? I think that is the direction moving forward. Educating a child is not just a job of a teacher or a school, it's a job of the society. It takes a village to raise a child. And now we are all the villager, and then we have to play our part in raising the child.
Absolutely. David, thank you so much for being on the show with me. David Chak from Arus Academy, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.